Hello and welcome to an off-season episode of the Rotoworld Baseball Show. I'm your host, Eric Samulski, joined by James Schiano. James, it's New Year's Eve, baby. I mean, it's New Year's Eve afternoon. It's 3 p.m. But listen, we're here to talk baseball, and then we're going to celebrate the end of a year. It was a year.
Yeah, darn right we are. And I'm excited about it. New Year's Eve's a wonderful day to just turn a page. It's a very natural page turn, like the most we have. So it's nice just like kind of chalk that one up and keep moving on to the next one.
Yeah, we are both in New York City people getting out of New York City because I've been born and raised here, and there's no worse place to be on New Year's Eve in my book. It's a lot of hoopla, and it's always frustrating. Go hang out with your friends, do some other things. We're going to talk baseball first. Before we do that, it's been a couple weeks since our last podcast. Obviously, with the holidays, we took a little break, and there's been some news, so we're going to catch you up on all that news. James and I are going to try to go over as much of like the last 2 weeks as we can, focusing a lot more on the bigger actionable names and moves, but trying to at least let you know of the stuff that happened in between as well, as you prepare for. Some of you are preparing for sicko drafts right now in January and February, so we want to make sure you have all the actionable info. And James, it has to start with the while you were sleeping move from, I guess it was Friday night, Saturday morning, who knows, where Corbin Burnes signed a 6-year, $210 million deal with the Arizona Diamondbacks. The deal, as has been very trendy over the last few years, it's not just $35 million a year, right? It has a $10 million signing bonus. It has a lot of deferred money. It has an opt-out after 2 years. It has all these moving pieces. But it's Corbin Burnes to the Diamondbacks for 6 years, a larger right now average annual value than what Max Fried got from the Yankees. My question for you is just, first of all, does this feel like a fair price for Corbin Burnes? And then what do you make of Corbin Burnes going to the Diamondbacks?
If you would have asked me 2 months ago, maybe towards the end of the season, what do you think Corbin Burnes will get as a contract? I would have said this felt low, like this felt cheap.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even wrap my mind around still the fact that Max Fried was guaranteed more money in his deal than Corbin Burnes. And also, I don't remember a free agent move almost in any sport that shocked me as much as this one did, where I was like,
yeah,
what?
For sure.
Like, there was no rumor, there was no murmur, there was no chatter, there was nothing. He's like, oh, Corbin Burnes is a Diamondback. But for him, for Burnes specifically, it feels like a neutral change. The new Camden Yards was a pretty easy place to pitch in. Arizona is not the best place to pitch in, but it's also not the worst. He's going from probably the hardest or second hardest division to pitch in to either the hardest or second hardest division to pitch in again, from the AL East to the NL West. It just seems very neutral from Corbin Burnes' perspective. And almost a little, again, it's still a little shocking that no other teams were willing to only give Corbin Burnes a 6-year deal, who's been one of the most consistent pitchers in the league.
Yeah, and that goes back to one of the conversations I'll ask, or the questions I'll ask you in a second. It seems like there was other, it seemed like there were teams that had offered more money. But the big thing is that he wanted to pitch out west. His family is out west. He has young kids. I believe he actually lives in Arizona itself. And so he took less money to go to Arizona. He's got a full no trade clause for the first 2 years of the deal. And listen, we try not to project that kind of like off-field stuff into fantasy analysis because it's hard to nail that down. But if you've got a guy who clearly wanted to live at home with young kids and gets to live at home with his family and pitch and play at home, like there's a sense of comfort there that is, I think, very clearly going to impact his day-to-day life, and that kind of stuff impacts performance. I know some people are wringing their hands over, Corbin Burnes, like he didn't look as good as, last year as he had in the past. The numbers look good, but he lost the cutter. I personally am of the mind that Corbin Burnes' cutter slowly started to find itself, or he started to find it and then really kind of found it in the last month and a half of the season. As of right now, he is my 4th ranked starting pitcher. I still feel really confident in Corbin Burnes. I know some people are worried about like the innings totals that he's thrown, right? We do this weird thing with starting pitchers where like we want pitchers that are safe and have safe innings. But then when we have a pitcher who throws a lot of innings, we're just like, well, he's obviously an injury risk because he's thrown a lot of innings. Like we can't be satisfied. But Corbin Burnes has thrown a lot of innings recently. And so some people are worried about like, whether he's going to get hurt. Do you still feel like, starting pitcher 4, 5, 6, like that's a pretty fair range for Corbin Burnes right now?
I think so. We just did the Rotoworld Fantasy Baseball mock, and I'm pretty
We did.
sure, just checking back right now, he was the fourth pitcher that went off the board in that. So commensurate with your rankings, I don't know. I feel like there was too much mud slung around Corbin Burnes' name through this free agency period, where it's like, oh, his K rate has dropped 4 years in a row. Like the Cutters lost some movement, got some back, but lost some. We never really know what's going on with these pitchers on the inside, what their directives are, either through themselves or through their teams. And a guy like Corbin Burnes, who was the horse for this Orioles team last year that was trying to put its head down and get as far in the playoffs as they could. There's probably something to the fact that they were like, hey, like we need you to pitch a little bit more to contact. We have this big, beautiful ballpark here. Let hitters just serve it up into the air, get some easy plays, and get to the next inning. And I think that is something that, again, gets lost sometimes in more broader base analysis, where I'm sure if Corbin Burnes was intending to strike out every single batter he faced,
Sure.
he would strike out more. But like, I don't know, it's still like there's still a comfort in Corbin Burnes for me that a lot of other pitchers, especially in that first 30 guys off the board range, just simply don't really have. Like there's probably debate with Logan Gilbert. There's probably really uncomfortable debate with Jacob deGrom, George Kirby. Like there's like that, I don't know, Garrett Crochet. Like where you're shopping there, you're thinking very high risk. And all that just means that'll change the rest of your draft after you get these guys. Like you take Corbin Burnes early, you can take a risk late. You do Garrett Crochet early, you have to be more careful late. So that's just kind of where your own risk tolerance is going to be in your drafts as you go through them.
Yeah. The last piece of this is just, do the Diamondbacks have to make a trade? I mean, I know they've said as of right now, they're not planning an imminent trade from their rotation. But right now, Fangraphs has them as with a 6-man rotation. And that rotation doesn't even include Ryan Nelson, who was arguably their best pitcher for the last 2 months of last season, right? So you have Corbin Burnes, Zach Gallen, Merrill Kelly, Eduardo Rodriguez, Brandon Pfaadt, Jordan Montgomery, and then the aforementioned Ryan Nelson. I think Ryan Nelson is one of their best 5 pitchers. I think he needs to be in their rotation. If he's not going to be in their rotation, please, for the love of all of us, trade him to a team that's going to put him in the rotation because he deserves to be there. But this feels like a team that needs to trade a starting pitcher, right?
Totally. And you just look at Jordan Montgomery there, and he's very obviously the ugly duckling, where it's like I don't think he wants to be there. I don't think they want him there, but it's just I don't know who's gonna take him with that lack of leverage. The name that keeps popping up to me, and I don't know why I keep thinking it. Maybe it's just because of all the Kyle Tucker, Josh Naylor kind of one-to-one in and out moves that we've seen this offseason. But Zach Allen, the guy with 1 year of control, the guy who probably nets the most out of everyone in that list, the guy who they're definitely seems to me not re-signing with money committed to Eduardo Rodriguez and Corbin Burnes now, and Merrill Kelly in the coming years, with a plethora of pitching options from the system. That seems very logical, but also to me would be just so disappointing from the Diamondbacks team building perspective to trade your second best pitcher when you just signed one of the 5, 6, 7 best in the league. But one of those guys I think certainly will be moved. And the only ones that really make sense to move come back to Gallen and Montgomery.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people like, what if Brandon Pfaadt went somewhere else? It's like Brandon Pfaadt is pre-arbitration next year.
Yeah,
like there's no reason for Arizona to move a guy making $800,000 who is a solid MLB pitcher and could be better because he has a few years of experience. It's got Eduardo Rodriguez and Jordan Montgomery are guys who, even with their contracts, could entice a team who just needs a 4th or 5th starter in their rotation with experience. Yeah. But, that might not happen before the season. We'll have to see. We've got other pitching moves to discuss. I guess the other biggest name is the Red Sox signed Walker Buehler, essentially to a qualifying offer. It was 1 year, $21.05 million. That's the exact same amount of money that the qualifying offer is. I feel like that's weirdly intentional, ridiculous, but whatever. Yeah. The Dodgers did not extend a qualifying offer to Walker Buehler. The Red Sox, interestingly, did extend a qualifying offer to Nick Pivetta. He declined. The Red Sox then got Walker Buehler for the same amount of money and also get a draft pick if Nick Pivetta signs somewhere else. So basically, they got like Walker Buehler and a draft pick for the same amount of money they were potentially going to get Pivetta for, which feels like a big win for Red Sox and Red Sox fans. Yeah. I'm just curious. Look, it wasn't a good year for Walker Buehler. Everybody's going to remember the postseason. In particular, I hate to bring this up to you, I'm sorry, but the World Series and the NLCS too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure you don't care about the World Series, but the NLCS part of it. But what version of Walker Buehler do you think we see? Like, are the Red Sox going to get a solid starter here? Or is this, $21 million for basically like an SP3, SP4 that doesn't really move the needle?
It's so ingrained in my mind that cold October night when Walker Buehler was just going fastballs with 24 inches of inverted vertical break and popping off curveballs like it was 2019, where I was like, who is this guy? And he, to me, was one of the hardest free agents to forecast because they were like, after that performance, I was like, oh, maybe Walker Buehler did get a lot of stuff back. He's getting further and further away from the surgery. As you get further away, especially the command improves. His command was great as the year went on. But then I think there was that the not getting the qualifying offer from the Dodgers was huge red flags, like huge alarm bells. Like the team that knows the most about him, where he seems like he'd love to go back there, won't give it to him. But then I think that got negated by how quickly the Dodgers signed Blake Snell. I think they were very aware that Blake Snell was super in the cards, very possible. So like we just don't want to put this much extra money in the rotation. I still can't get myself to really trust Walker Buehler, especially the fact that no team was willing to give him multiple years. Or again, like the conversation we had before, we don't know what's going on the inside. Maybe he didn't want to get multiple years because he knew he needed 1 year to bring himself up. But
he did. Apparently, the Red Sox wanted to go multiple years, and he wanted 1 year. There's a mutual option for the second year, but mutual options are hardly ever exercised because either the player has a great year and declines because he wants more, or the player has a terrible year and the team declines because they don't want to pay that much money. So yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with you. Like, I think it's a good gamble for the Red Sox. It felt like after getting Crochet, adding Walker Buehler felt like the right gamble of, hey, maybe, akin to what the Mets did last year. Like maybe we take a guy who is struggling. He likes it here. He takes a 1 year gamble. He likes what we're doing. We have a good year out of him. He wants to stay. We get a little bit longer contract out of him. He doesn't have to be the ace for the Red Sox. Buehler himself said, like, when the lights came on in October, he felt like it kind of woke him up. So maybe that carries over. Who knows? My second question to you, the second part of this is the Red Sox rotation now of Garrett Crochet, Walker Buehler, Tanner Houck, Brian Bayo, Lucas Giolito. Is that enough to compete in the AL East right now?
I think that I would feel much more comfortable about that division competing if they literally had a different home ballpark. Like it's hard for me to squint and look at that Red Sox rotation besides Garrett Crochet and really have heaps of confidence in any of them. Like, do we even think that Walker Buehler can beat what Nick Pivetta did last year, which was an ERA in the mid fours and almost, I think, over 10K per nine? Like, is that even something that
or what Cutter Crawford did last year? Because if he replaces Crawford in the rotation too, who knows?
And Crawford had, again, him and Houck both, they kind of really oscillated in how effective they were. But to me, it's just, I don't think they're even close to the Yankees still. Would love to hear what you think about that, but it still seems like they're a piece or two away from actually being able to win the 94 games it would take to compete in the division.
I agree. I think it needs at least. I think that the starting rotation is fine. It's not the Yankees, but the Yankees' strength is their rotation right now. It's way better than what the Orioles are putting out in their rotation. The Red Sox lineup needs another bat, and it would be great if one of those prospects hit, whether it's Campbell or Anthony or Mayer. Like if one of those guys is an impact bat, and they get like a Santander or a Bregman or something like that, the lineup gets deeper. The starting rotation is pretty good. The bullpen is getting a little better. And I think it can compete. I still think they're a step behind, and I think they know that because they're trying to protect their prospects a little bit and not like fully block those guys off.
Yeah, that's probably the right idea too, because those prospects seem incredible.
Yes. The Red Sox were interested in trading at one point for Jesus Luzardo. That was before he hit the IL with a back injury in the middle of last season. Luzardo was traded this offseason to the Philadelphia Phillies for two minor league prospects. It kind of felt like a soft return for a guy who seemingly was was a young stud at one point. He was one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. We know it never really materialized with Oakland. He had settled into a fine pitcher for the Marlins. You're looking at like a 3.5 ERA guy with like a 29% strikeout rate and whips around like 115, 120. But the back injury, he had injuries before. There were some injury concerns. He has thrown over 100 innings one time. He'll be 27 next year, so it's not like it's not a huge amount of seasons. But if you want to talk about durability, he's thrown over 100 innings once. He had a 5 ERA last year. Velocity was down. Then he got hurt. It was just a total lost season. Do you think now going to Philadelphia, it's a huge park downgrade for him? He is moving into an offensive environment. Huge team upgrade, though, moving from the Marlins to the Phillies. Are you willing to buy back in on Luzardo, given how bad last year was? Do you think you're going to get a discount, or are you trying to stay away?
Last year it went so bad so quickly and just so sharply that you have to almost throw it out, in my estimation. But I also don't think that means you automatically like snap back to 2023 Luzardo. While the park is a huge downgrade, Caleb Cotham, who's the Phillies pitching coach, is a massive upgrade. Like he is He's someone who's like gaining a lot of credibility. And the pitchers, I think the Phillies, have been able to squeeze a lot more out of pitchers in the last few years than they were the previous years before that. So I think it's a relevant thing that he's going to have probably the best coaching Luzardo's ever had in his career, coming from the Oakland. I guess he just know, never mind the Athletics and the Marlins organizations. Like, this is going to be the first time he has possibly, like, just he's going to be exposed to a lot of new, probably more advanced things he's seen in a while. But there's a great term that Eno Saris uses. He says a lot of the Rates and Barrels podcast. It's a precarious fastball. And I think Luzardo has exactly that precarious fastball, where the shape is not great and it won't miss bats on its own, but he was sitting 97 miles an hour a few years ago. So that makes the fastball great. Last year, when he loses a tick and a half, and we now know it's from the back injury mostly, suddenly the fastball starts to get hit. Hitters are hitting the ball harder. The ball's leaving the yard more. He's getting to deeper counts. He's not striking out as many hitters. That, I think, is the most relevant thing to Luzardo. If he comes out in spring training and you see a 98 on the gun, it's all systems go, full speed ahead. And the Phillies probably got a steal because, again, they traded, I think, 2 teenagers to get Jesus Luzardo. But he's the one where I think I'm dipping a toe in the pool until I see a velocity reading.
I also, you're looking at a 3.5 ERA guy in Miami, right? So even if he's the same pitcher, and we're talking about the same pitcher back to full health. So we're talking about the guy we saw in Miami 2022, 2023, etc. That's a guy giving up about 40% fly ball rate. The fly ball rate has increased each of the last 2 years, but has a home run to fly ball rate that is above average, right? It's 64th percentile in baseball-ish. That is going to increase moving from Miami to Philadelphia if he continues to give up 40% fly balls.
Yeah.
I find it hard to project him for better than like a mid 3.5 ERA. So maybe you're looking at like a 3.7 ERA pitcher, and you hope he gets back to like the around 10 K per nine that he was before, but we don't know if he will. And so you got a 3.7 ERA pitcher with a 1.2 whip and a pretty solid strikeout rate who's going to win games. Like, that's a fine, if everything bounces back, that's a fine pitcher, but it's not somebody where you're like, man, I have to get this guy. Like, that is in a realm of like your SP3-4 type of pitcher where there are tons of guys like that.
Yeah, and I'm even trying to think of like comps who will be around Jesus Luzardo. I'm just pulling up the NFC and ADP right now, where Luzardo is in the 400s actually in terms of ADP, behind Nick Martinez, Blake Trinan, and DJ Hurst. I think that's something that in that range right there, I think he's a screaming buy. Around the same as a little bit behind Brian Bayo, Eric Fedde. That's probably would you rather. Would you rather Jesus Luzardo or Brian Bayo?
Well, you know that I'm a Red Sox fan and I'm a Bayo believer.
There you go.
But yeah, that's a tough question. The logical side of my brain says Luzardo, and the like dreaming on upside fandom part of my brain says, but what if Bayo's 3 pitches all work together? And then I say Bayo. But I think if push came to shove, I'd be picking Luzardo.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Luzardo, he's also going the same range in the last 2 weeks specifically as Luis Severino, Merrill Kelly, still Clay Holmes. I think it's a fun range for him. I think in terms of pitching, darts to throw around pick 300, he's not a bad one at all.
Fully agree. Let's end the pitching section of this by talking about your New York Mets. The bigger signing since we last recorded a podcast was them re-signing Sean Manaea. They also did sign Griffin Canning to a 1-year deal before then, which seems, kind of like the last year Severino Manaea deal where they're trying to, sign a 1-year contract with a guy who they think that they can get a little bit more out of. My question to you is, this currently sits at a 5-man rotation, I guess kind of 6. That's Sean Manaea, Kodai Senga, Frankie Montas, David Peterson, Clay Holmes, provided he can earn the starting job, and then maybe a 6th starter of like either Paul Blackburn or Griffin Canning. Is this a rotation that the Mets can compete with, or is this a problem?
What are we using for the term compete? Do we mean compete for get to the playoffs? Yeah, totally. Get into a series with the Dodgers? I don't think so at all. I also I feel very high in Clay Holmes. I'm incredibly confident with that signing. Everything that's come out from the Mets world about what they're going to do with Clay Holmes as a starter, it gives me a lot of confidence. That's also partly my bias from being a Mets fan, so I'm going to create content about the Mets specifically. But it seems like this Sean Manaea move was they were like, we have a certain idea for how much we want to sign you for. Like, will you do this or will you test the waters? And Manaea seemingly took a discount. He only took a 3-year deal. He's taking about $20 million total of deferred money that he's getting in $2 million installments 10 years from now. Like, it seems like this was something where he gave up something else on the table to come back to the Mets, to believe in what the Mets are doing with their pitching development. And I think that's the only way to squint and look at this Mets rotation and be like, yes, this is the rotation that can win the National League East. Because you're in a division where you might have the two best rotation. I mean, the Phillies probably the best rotation in baseball right now. And the Braves are probably, if Spencer Strider's back and Chris Sale's healthy, easily a top 10. So it's tough to compete with, but they did it with their voodoo magic last year. Jeremy Hefner is a wizard. And I think that, I don't know, like, it's just every single one of those guys has such individualistic question marks. That's really hard to put them all together and think that it's all going to work out just like it did last year. Last year was like a 90th percentile outcome for what the Mets pitchers could have done. And that was even without Cody Bellinger. And he still has massive question marks himself. It's just, there seems to be a high variance of what these Mets pitchers can do this year. And it's going to be exciting.
Those are all guys who like have some things that intrigue me. And even Tyler McGill, who,
never quit,
started like relying on this cutter a little more. And you're like, oh, maybe I could squint and see it. And then you've got Christian Scott, who's probably going to return like June or July. You've got Jose Budo, who showed some things at times in the past where you're like, you can make a case for these guys, but there's no ace. And it worries me a little bit that there's no like guy to really fall back on where you're like, I need to have this win. And I need to have this win is either Sean Manaea or Cody Bellinger. If you get second half of 2023 Cody Bellinger, all of a sudden it looks a little bit better. If you don't, if you get first half of 2023 Cody Bellinger, you're looking at a rotation that has a bunch of like SP2, SP4 type of arms. And it's a little concerning. But again, like Steve Cohen's they're gonna do what they need to do if in the middle of the season it's like, hey, this isn't looking so good.
Yeah, the one player to look out for, I would say, is Brandon Sproat. Brandon Sproat tore through the minor leagues last year. He went from someone who was not even in the top 200 of some lists, someone who I think in Baseball Prospectus, his most recent refresh, he was in the top 40. So he's a pitcher that I think people in and around the Mets are very excited about. And Christian Scott, he actually missed most of last year, but he didn't wind up getting his Tommy John surgery until late in the season. So he's a full wash for 2025. We won't see him this year.
Well, he did do the internal brace, which technically has a shorter return, but it's all a question mark, right? He got the internal brace. And so theoretically he could come back faster, but we have no idea. I'm going to hit you. Yes, I'm going to hit you with a couple quick hitters, just so the people know some of these moves, and you just chime in at the end if there's anything you think is actually actionable or notable. Teoscar Hernandez re-signed with the Dodgers, kind of felt inevitable. It happened. Nathaniel Lowe was traded to the Nationals, and Josh Bell signed with the Nationals. So that is your DH first base pairing on the Nationals. The Nationals lineup has two right-handed hitters in the entire lineup. That's the Nationals lineup. It's lefties and switch hitters. Carlos Santana re-signed with the Guardians, and that spot opened up because of a move we'll talk about in a second. Max Kepler signed with the Phillies. Gio Urshela signed with the Oakland Athletics. The Red Sox also inked Patrick Sandoval, who will be out for probably all of next year. The Nationals signed Michael Soroka and said that he's going to be in their rotation. And the Marlins traded Vidal Brujan to the Cubs for Matt Mervis. Any of these feel like they require a little extra discussion?
I think the Nate Lowe trade is fun because, one, him and Josh Bell together elevate that Nationals lineup to a place it wasn't last year. So that would make me much more confident in a player like James Wood with the high draft cost that he has, being someone that I'm more confident in James Wood's running RBI totals. The fact that lineup has gotten significantly deeper. And also the fact that Nathaniel Lowe was traded for Robert Garcia, who's a very talented lefty who comes from the Nationals now to the Rangers. I don't know how this Rangers bullpen is going to wind up. I feel like they're going to invest in it because of how good the rest of their roster is. But Garcia, along with Jacob Webb, who came from the Orioles, those are the two guys who I think right now are the leaders in the clubhouse as it's currently rated for saves on that Rangers team, who, again, the bullpen is completely devoid of any talent whatsoever.
You know they're going to – is Jose Leclerc still under contract, right? You know he's getting another shot.
He's not under contract.
They cannot quit. Oh, he's free agent finally?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they'll re-sign Jose Leclerc, and they'll give him another shot because they can't quit Jose Leclerc. We talked about this before. I would just put a pin in the Matt Mervis goes to the Miami Marlins. He was interesting. He had good AAA numbers. It didn't happen in Chicago. If he gets a full run of playing time in Miami, which we're not entirely sure he will, in deeper formats, like who knows? Maybe it's there's some interesting power there it didn't happen. Maybe it does happen on a bad team where you're just like, hey, I'm going to play every day, and we'll see, what goes out there. So I would put a pin in that one and see if it happens. But there are no bad teams to talk about in our NFL Week 18 Sunday night football matchup, because the NFC's number 1 seed is on the line this Sunday night when the Vikings take on the Lions in Detroit. Coverage of the showdown that wraps up the regular season begins at 7 p.m. Eastern time on NBC and Peacock. One of these teams is going to be the number 1 seed in the NFC. The other is going to be a wild card, even though they won 13 games. They'll be playing on the road because the NFL has to give division winners a home playoff game. And there's no reseeding. And so it's just a brutal, brutal situation for whoever loses that game.
It's awful. The fact they have to go on the road with 14 wins is ridiculous.
Right. And eventually probably go on the road every single game after that, because there's no reseeding afterwards. It's, whatever. What are you going to do? That's the way the NFL does it. We had a lot of shuffling in the AL. We had talked on the last episode about the Kyle Tucker trade, Kyle Tucker going to the Chicago Cubs. We knew in that moment, we're like, what's going to happen with the Cubs? What's going to happen with the Astros? Are they punting? What are they doing? They go out and then add Christian Walker to the lineup. Christian Walker, 3-time Gold Glover, perennial 30 homer hitter. He is not the Isaac Paredes type of pull happy, I need to pull the ball in order to hit homers, but his power profile does play up really well with the Crawford boxes in in Houston, coming from Arizona, which is a little bit more pitcher friendly. What do you think of this move? I mean, Christian Walker has been like a solid but potentially underrated first baseman in fantasy. I guess my 2 questions are, what are you thinking about Christian Walker fantasy wise? And does this do enough to replace Kyle Tucker in the Astros lineup? The Astros remain a contender in the AL.
It definitely doesn't replace Kyle Tucker. I don't know. I think I was disappointed more broadly by the Astros in having arguably one of the best rosters in the American League and then trading arguably their best all-around player. I think that's a strange thing to do. I understand a lot of people think they did well in that trade, and I'm sure they did. If they can coax about a Paredes like be actually a 30 home run guy and see what they have in Cam Smith, but this seems like to me a team that is kind of bending their knee and ending their dynasty in one shot. Like, they'll still be competitive. I think they'll still be one of the better teams, at least in their division. That's suddenly one of the most competitive divisions in baseball, because I think the Rangers team is ready after an injury-riddled year. I think the Mariners team, we always know about the pitching, if they can ever hit. But I don't know, this was more just a vital move for the Astros. Their lineup was so bad after the Tucker trade and before the Walker signing. And right now, even still, they have probably the worst projected outfield in baseball. That is what we'll have Chas McCormick, Taylor Trammell, and Jake Myers. Probably 1.5 major league players in that mix. But the top of the order is still great, and your Christian Walker's going to have a chance to have a really productive year. But that Diamondbacks team last year, I think, led all of baseball in runs scored. So I think he actually, strangely, going from the Diamondbacks to the Astros doesn't make sense in our brains from what the last 10 years of baseball have looked like, but probably a slight lineup downgrade. Maybe, I mean, it probably at least a net neutral with Jordan, Isaac Paredes, Jose Altuve ahead of him, wherever he slots into the lineup. But he's fine. I think it's just like first base is a position that it kind of gets muddy quickly. And I think Christian Walker is a very, very comfortable and safe player around pick 100 right now.
Yeah, if he slots in like after Altuve, before Yordan Alvarez, that's a really interesting place for him, because Altuve gets on more often than not. You're not gonna be able to pitch around Walker with Yordan behind him in the lineup. I could see a 35 plus homer season from Walker. You have your stalwarts at the top of first base. You have Vlad Jr., you have Bryce Harper, you have Matt Olson, who we think is going to bounce back. We'll talk about Pete Alonso later, but he's in that conversation as well. But I think that Walker kind of emerges in that, like, once you get to the 5th, or even like with Pete Alonso, again, we don't know where Pete's going to wind up, but like, I think once you get beyond those guys, like when you get to the 4th spot in the first base rankings, like, I think you could start entertaining whether Walker is that guy. He might wind up 6. He might wind up 5. He might wind up 7 for you, whatever your preference is. But I think once you get beyond like Vlad and Bryce and probably still Matt Olson, I think you can have that conversation about whether the next guy is Christian Walker.
Would you rather for you? I see it one spot ahead in the rundown, but this Walker signing kind of pushed this crazy first base musical chairs. And we saw Josh
True.
Naylor with that get traded to the Arizona Diamondbacks. Then right before we mentioned before, then Carlos Santana goes back to the Guardians. They kind of everyone just started trading spots in 24 hours, a week and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that? Let me just say, who would you rather have? Who do you think has the better season between Josh Naylor and Christian Walker?
I should note, just for the people out there, I do know that Freddie Freeman exists. And Freddie Freeman probably up in that tier as well.
Definitely.
In the surefire guys above Christian Walker, then you get to Christian Walker. So maybe Christian Walker starting at 5. For me, it's Christian Walker. I like Josh Naylor. I mean, we saw a little bit of a power surge last year. I don't think that he has the power upside that Christian Walker does, especially Christian Walker with the Crawford boxes in Arizona and Houston. I keep doing that. I don't think that Naylor is a 35 homer guy, and I think that Christian Walker could definitely be. I think the Astros are going to make at least one more move in the outfield just to deepen that lineup a little bit. So I don't know that Arizona will be a better lineup overall than Houston. I think they'll go into the season probably around the same. And so I think I'd rather have Christian Walker's continued source of power, which has become something we really need to kind of search for in fantasy, over Josh Naylor's like 1 year. Hey, I can hit the ball out of the ballpark. I'm not just a high batting average, line drive, spray the gaps type of guy. And so, yeah, I also like, but I like the move for Arizona. I like Josh Naylor in the middle of that lineup. I'm happy to draft Josh Naylor. As you mentioned, like the trade was for Slade Cecconi and essentially a first round pick. It's a comp pick. I think it's like, actually, no, I believe it's in the 60s. So like a second round draft pick, which in baseball, you can only trade comp picks. So like it's very rare, but essentially the Guardians traded a second round pick traded Josh Naylor for a second round pick and Slade Cecconi, and then immediately signed Carlos Santana. Carlos Santana, who is a better defensive first baseman than Josh Naylor, has similar power, lower batting average, but it's kind of a net neutral move for Cleveland, I think, because they were not going to re-sign Josh Naylor, and that was just a given. They weren't signing him to a contract. It's a little bit of a light return, but listen, Slade Cecconi has good AAA numbers, did not really produce at the major league level. Cleveland is a decent organization when it comes to developing pitching. They obviously saw something they liked in him. Reports came out afterwards that Tampa Bay was also trying to trade for Cecconi. So you have two organizations that know how to develop pitching that are trying to trade for a guy with good AAA numbers. And that makes me think, okay, I need to look into this a little more, because clearly there's something going on here with this guy that good organizations think if we do X, Y, and Z, we can get a lot out of him. And so maybe Slade Cecconi becomes somebody that is on the fantasy radar in our drafts next year. Like, I don't know where we're at right now. We might need to see it, but it wouldn't shock me if the Guardians knew what they were doing and at least trading for a guy that could be a solid MLB starter.
It's also the flip side of what you talked about before about the Diamondbacks. People being like, Diamondbacks should trade Brandon Pfaadt. It's like, they're not trading Brandon Pfaadt. Brandon Pfaadt's years away from arbitration. Cecconi's the same way. And those two teams, while the Rays and the Guardians are known for good pitching development, they're also known for being unscrupulously cheap. And I think that the fact that a pitcher came on the market who could possibly have 6 years of team control and a modicum of potential, a team will jump on that. And I'm just looking at Cecconi's stuff plus right now. He's a plus slider, a plus curveball, plus changeup, and a 95 stuff plus fastball. So you have probably a full major league rotation there. And again, the fact you can get 6 years of team control in a guy for a Guardians team that their pitching fell apart last year. They were out of humans by the end of the season. They had to make a late season trade for Alex Cobb, and they had to nurse him through like a hip and a fingernail and a groin.
They signed Matthew Boyd off the street, and then they were like, "Hey, you want to pitch?"
And now Matthew Boyd's going to make $15 million this year. So it's like they are able to pull a lot of pitching out of their hat, but I think that where Cecconi brings the most is the modicum of potential. I think there's some interest there. I think he's gonna rise in popularity through draft season. But 6 years of team control and a guy who's already 25 years old, like, that's gold for these teams. Yeah. And the fact that the Guardians could be like, we want to give you 1 year of Josh Naylor for potentially 6 years of even low fours ERA and like a
draft pick that we might hit on.
100%. Like, I think for them, especially knowing they had Carlos Santana in their back pocket, that's a no-brainer for a team that loves to live on the margins, whether they should or not, like the Cleveland Guardians.
Yeah, and listen, we have seen that profile work in Cleveland a lot. A pitcher, a pitcher with a mediocre fastball, but a bevy of good secondaries. I mean, Cleveland turned Corey Kluber into a Cy Young winner with essentially that profile. I'm not saying they're going to do the same to Slade Cecconi, but I'm saying a guy who has enough plus secondaries, good secondaries that you can get the most out of. You can make do with a mediocre fastball. It has to be average. They can make it average. If it's really a below average pitch, it's going to be tough. If it's an average fastball in a lot of secondaries, then you can possibly make something of it.
Yeah, there's potential.
We hinted at the last podcast, but we didn't actually talk about it, about the Cody Bellinger trade to the Yankees. It was just for Cody Petit. The Yankees basically ate all of the money. It was essentially a salary dump for the Cubs, which was interesting after getting Kyle Tucker, but whatever. I mean, do with it what you will. We're not talking about the Cody Petit side of this. Last year when Bellinger was a free agent before he re-upped with the Cubs, I said the Yankees are a perfect landing spot for him because of the ballpark. I do think it's a really good landing spot for him. I think that Cody Bellinger's stock is looking up in New York in that ballpark with a lineup that is getting a little bit deeper, going to be better than the Cubs lineup that he was in last year, I believe. What do you think of this move for Cody Bellinger's fantasy situation next year?
I think it's tremendous for his fantasy situation. The one thing that Cody Bellinger still does to the high level at this point in his career, he doesn't swing and miss very much. He's done really well as building contact as he's lost his power from the shoulder injury that just seemingly zapped his entire career. But he is elite and one of the top guys in the league in pulling his fly balls. I think I have the number coming up right here. It's the 90th percentile in pulled fly ball rate last year, the 87th percentile the year before. He, and as a lefty in Yankee Stadium, but I don't know how that lineup is going to shake out. I was arguing with my Yankee fan uncle over Christmas about who's going to hit where and where everyone's going to wind up. There's a chance Cody Bellinger winds up leadoff on this team ahead of Aaron Judge. Where if we know this, because I think some people want to pigeonhole or shoehorn Anthony Volpe into that spot. I just don't think Anthony Volpe's that guy.
He's not that guy.
He's not, at least until he proves it. But the fact that there's a non-zero chance that Cody Bellinger is going to be first base and outfield eligible, hitting ahead of Aaron Judge, and pulling more fly balls at a higher rate than most hitters in the league. Like, that's someone who can really manufacture some fantasy value despite some blue lollipops on Baseball Savant.
A lot of blue lollipops. The other move the Yankees made, you're talking about deepening that lineup. They signed Paul Goldschmidt. Listen, this is not the same Paul Goldschmidt that we knew before. But is this a Paul Goldschmidt where there was some improvement in the second half? Do you think that the Yankees are getting a viable MLB regular? Are you interested in Paul Goldschmidt in fantasy formats?
I legitimately do. My toxic trait this offseason has been believing way too much in Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado, just because that Cardinals team was such a black hole last year. I feel like because the one thing that both of those guys did worse than they did the year before. Arenado hasn't hit the ball very hard for a few years, but he's always highly productive without that. Both of them started expanding the zone last year for the first time in seemingly their entire careers. That, to me, are just two guys who are supposed to be the leaders of a playoff hopeful team, squeezing the bat too tight, trying to do too much, and not playing their game. If you look at all of the damage and the exit velocity and everything that Paul Goldschmidt has done the last 2 years, and again, 2 years ago wasn't great either, but last year was objectively horrible. The only thing that looks ridiculously worse is how much he was expanding the zone, swing and missing. I think if you can make him relax, just tell him all you need to do is be better than concussed Anthony Rizzo. Like, you suddenly have a guy that's a player who could hit 6th or 7th in that Yankees lineup and just kind of feast on all the big on-base guys they're going to be on base ahead of him in the order.
Yeah, I agree with you as well. Scott and I talked about the Goldschmidt signing a little bit on the last podcast. I wanted to get your take on it. But if any of you missed the podcast before, the Winter Meetings podcast, make sure you check that out. Scott and I went over Paul Goldschmidt a little bit. I have written an article about him as well. But yes, I believe in a modest bounce back. A modest.
No MVPs. No.
No major difference maker, but a solid MLB regular for sure.
Oh yeah.
A little bit of an underrated signing was Joc Pederson going to the Rangers. I wanted to bring this up. Listen, Joc Pederson, we know who he is at this point in time. He is a really good DH against right-handed pitching, and probably will definitely not play against left-handed pitching, and will not really play the field. The Rangers don't really need him to. My question for you is, where does this lineup stack up for you in the AL? Because after a few moves, The Rangers lineup is now Marcus Semien, Corey Seager, Wyatt Langford, Joc Pederson, Adolis Garcia, Josh Young, Jake Berger, Evan Carter, Jonah Heim.
Yeah.
Is that the best lineup in the AL?
I think that might be the second best lineup in baseball behind the Los Angeles Dodgers. That I wrote up the Jake Berger trade a few weeks ago when that happened. I was like, wow, this is a great lineup. The Rangers right now, again, now getting rid of Nate Lowe and adding Joc Pederson, just get another big lumbering power bat. They're gonna have 8 regulars, everyone besides their catcher, projected for over 100 WRC plus. Like that is ridiculous. There's not many teams that can say that, especially while also not giving up a ton defensively. I don't know what's going to happen between Wyatt Langford and Evan Carter and Leody Taveras in center field, but this is a sensationally good lineup. But I also give the Rangers credit because last year they ran out of bodies. Their DHs had one of the least productive seasons in all of baseball. 67 WRC plus from Texas Rangers DHs last year. Second worst in the league, only better than the White Sox, which really goes to show you how bad it was. But between those guys and then having Ezekiel Duran, Josh Smith on the bench who can kind of fill in everywhere, and Leody Taveras as a center field speed guy, this is one of the more complete crops of offensive players that any team has. And there's not that much coming up again. Like, they still have Justin Foscue in the minor leagues, but there's not a ton behind them. So I wouldn't be surprised there maybe still be one more bench bat that gets added before the season. But this, especially with options on Ezekiel Duran, Josh Smith still, this is a wagon, an offensive wagon, this lineup.
Yes.
It's incredible.
And they're a contender if their pitching breaks right. There's a lot of question
100%.
marks in the staff, right? But DeGrom is going to be fully healthy to start the season. So whatever we get out of DeGrom, they brought back Eovaldi. We know Eovaldi, when healthy, has been really good. Can Cody Bradford build off of what he did last year? We didn't think that he was going to be a kind of a worthwhile starter, and then he looked great last year. You've got, what do they get out of Jack Leiter, Kumar Rocker, right? Young guys who seem on the precipice, who, what kind of steps do they take in their development? There are a lot of things that, if they break right pitching wise for the Rangers, I wouldn't be shocked if they're the best team in AL. Probably not in baseball, but I think they'll be up there. But it depends on all those things kind of breaking right a little bit. We'll end this segment with one of the surprise teams in the AL last year, the Detroit Tigers, making a signing for an infielder, which was not the big name infielder they've reportedly been in on, but they signed Gleyber Torres. They signed Gleyber Torres to play second base. They're moving Colt Keith to first base full time. What do you make of this signing, and what do you make of the decision to move Colt Keith to first base, which really kind of squeezes out Spencer Torkelson a little bit?
I think that's the surprising part about this move, the squeezing of Spencer Torkelson. I don't know what has happened there internally, or if he just needs his bell rung a little bit, but this move to me just says that Spencer Torkelson was not going to have a starting spot in this team. And I know last year Colt Keith picked it up by the end of the season, but I also don't know if Colt Keith played well enough to be like, his guy should be guaranteed a starting spot. And I don't even think he was bad enough defensively at second base to warrant like getting moved off that position. I don't know. This was another one similar to the Corbin Burnes where I was like, what, really? And Gleyber Torres last year, I don't know if it was the pressure of a contract year, but it was horrible across the board. Every single thing he did got worse. The power was not there as much. The speed was not there as much. He didn't hit the ball as hard. He still doesn't chase very much, but it's just not, I don't know. Something went wrong with Gleyber Torres. I don't know if Detroit, Comerica Park is the place for him to get right, especially in a lineup that is still not I would say not very good. But I don't know how this is going to shake between Colt Keith and Spencer Torkelson. It seems to me like they just might be in a battle now for who's going to be playing. And then maybe they stick Kerry Carpenter in the outfield, and then they get the other guy gets a DH. But I don't know. Maybe they do still have Bregman up their sleeve as well, because they keep being reported close to him. They still have Scott Harris and the AJ Hinch connection. So I don't know. I mean, Gleyber Torres is an improvement over the other players they had in their roster, but I don't think he's exactly a world beater at this point in his career.
No. Yeah, we'll talk about Bregman in the final segment coming up after this, where we kind of predict where these final guys go. I think Gleyber Torres, sometimes teams and players both need a fresh start. The Yankees apparently didn't even offer Gleyber Torres any form of contract after the season. I think they were all just done with each other. And so maybe, playing out the last year of your contract in a team where you don't feel like they want you and you kind of don't want to be there anymore, like maybe you need a fresh start. The power production is going to go down because he's moving to Comerica. But maybe it's a little bit of a bounce back for Gleyber Torres. We've seen decent kind of power speed from him. The lineup is going to be fine, not great. I've been out on Spencer Torkelson for a little bit now. And so I'm not buying into him kind of like pushing Colt Keith out of this lineup. I think he would require a DH spot, which would require them to DH to move Kerry Carpenter in the outfield. I don't know that they're going to do that with, Parker Meadows and with Riley Green and Veerling needs to, work his way in there at some point, especially against lefties. So, it's an interesting thing to see how this shakes out. I think it's hard to draft Spencer Torkelson with confidence until we get into spring training and we start to see how this lineup might shake out a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
We're going to project where some of these final guys sign. But before we do that, conference play heats up on the hardwood as we enter the new year. Catch a Big East showdown this Sunday when Providence takes on two-time defending national champion UConn at 2 p.m. Eastern time, only on NBC and Peacock. I do love college basketball season. That'll be a good one. So we'll have to tune in for that one. This will be a little bit of a quick hitters here. We're just going to go over some of the bigger names that are still out there and chat a little about just project where they might end up. You mentioned Alex Bregman. We know he's not going back to the Astros.
No.
At the end of the day, where do you think Alex Bregman signs?
I don't know how robust Alex Bregman's market really is right now. Like, I see two teams that are kind of in the middle on the border of competing that could really use an Alex Bregman to legitimize themselves. The first one we talked about just now is the Detroit Tigers. Not exactly still very strong infield, even with Gleyber Torres and Cole Keith there. I think he would help a lot. Also, I keep going back to the Washington Nationals for Alex Bregman. I know he has some family connections to the D.C. area, and right now they have Jose Tena as their projected everyday third baseman, who I think that in terms of their entire lineup, he's the only real gaping hole at this point, which is amazing to say for a Nationals team that seemed like they were going to be one of the worst teams in baseball for the foreseeable future a few years ago. I would like to, I mean, I don't want to see that happen as a Mets fan, but I think in terms of like a fantasy place to go and a place where he could actually elevate a team, be like kind of be wanted and be respected and like jump in as a leader. Like, I think that the Bregman Nationals fit is kind of awesome, honestly.
There's also the connection to the Red Sox. Bregman has mentioned that he's open to playing second base.
Yeah.
He has done it before. Alex Cora, who, has a very strong connection with Bregman, wants Bregman there. It seems like the rest of the Red Sox organization is not as sure about it, but the Red Sox organization does want a right-handed bat. And so signing Bregman at second base does make some sense. There is a question of the longevity of the contract, right? The Red Sox have Marcelo Mayer coming up. They have Christian Campbell, who plays second base, coming up. So maybe they don't want to sign Bregman to 5 or 6 years, but maybe Bregman wants that. My gut says it's the Tigers is where I think Bregman winds up.
That's fair.
So my gut tells me. Where does Pete Alonso end up, James? And does anybody actually want him other than the Mets?
I don't think so. It seems like as much as Pete and Scott Boras try to goat the market for him, it doesn't really seem like there is one. There was a report of the contract that went around between Carlos Baerga and Andy Martino last week that the Mets had offered Pete a short-term, 3-year, $90 million contract with opt-outs. And apparently that him and Scott Boras said, no, like we still want the big deal. We still want over $160, $175 million. I don't know who's giving Pete Alonso that contract, especially if the Mets seem forthright. They're not going to do it. He has a qualifying offer attached to him. He just came off one of the worst year of his career. Saved his value, I think, a bit with the playoff heroics, but to me, there isn't really an obvious fit. Like, the Mariners could use Pete Alonso. It doesn't seem like they're willing to pay anybody.
Right.
The Giants theoretically could use Pete Alonso, but I can't even imagine a worse ballpark for Pete Alonso's strengths and weaknesses than Oracle Park, where Pete's power alley to right center field, all of those homers would now become doubles and maybe a few very funny triples for Pete as he rounds second base. But it seems to me right now like the Mets and Pete Alonso are the last two kids at the dance, and they're just staring at each other. And someone has to make the first move to actually go on the dance floor, and no one's willing to blink at this point.
There's some like Cubs chatter, which makes a little bit of sense, but I think it's going to be the Mets at the end of the day. And I think it would have shocked me if a year ago you told me there'd be no market for free agent Pete Alonso, but I think there's no market for free agent Pete Alonso, and I think the best fit is for him to just go back to New York.
Yeah, I hope so.
I think the biggest name still remaining and the most intriguing name still remaining is Roki Sasaki. We know that 20 teams submitted proposals to meet with him. We already know that he's met with a bunch and allegedly is going to visit some cities after this little holiday. He went back to Japan. The face-to-face meetings were in California. He's going to go visit some other cities. There's talk that some of the teams that didn't get face-to-face meetings may get city meetings where he goes to visit them in their city. So, like, a lot of these teams aren't technically out of it yet, but I don't know, man. It's so hard to figure out. And somebody brought up the like, who knows what moral obligation Roki Sasaki has to any other player? Probably none. He wants to make the best decision for himself.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, however long he waits to sign, they say he's not going to sign by January 15th, which is when the international pool kind of like begins. No team is going to sign international players if they think they have a shot at Roki Sasaki because he's going to get all of the money. So that means every international player is going to have to wait until this guy signs so that they can sign a contract with teams and they can determine their own fate. And I get it. He's trying to make the best decision for himself, but it is kind of a bummer that the entire international market and all those other people around the world are having their futures put on hold until he makes a decision. But at the end of the day, what do you think that decision winds up being?
Yeah, I think Jared Seidler said that of Baseball Prospectus.
It was Jared. Yeah.
And it is funny that if Sasaki did sign in this first period, which ends on January 15th, every team is pretty set with who they have, but only a few teams can offer him money. I think the only teams that could offer him $2 million were both the Dodgers and the Orioles, which funny how that works out. But if he does sign after, and I know the Mets are a team that would be in a strange situation. They've already committed tons of next year's international free agent pool. They're ready to go. The Mets are Elian Pena, who would project to be the Mets' highest bonus given international free agent ever. And that's something that you kind of just have to put your hands up in the air if you wind up with Roki Sasaki, then send the entire market into a tizzy. It's also funny
those guys then don't have a deal, and then they have to sign with somebody else.
Yeah,
it'll be the ramifications of this will be really, really interesting to see.
Yeah, this definitely also should be a signal that this probably needs to be tightened up a little bit. The fact that this can happen, but it's also funny to me that Roki Sasaki is going to be taking all of these city meetings in January. So he's going to come to New York in January and Boston in January, and then he's going to go back to San Diego and Los Angeles. And you're going to tell me he's not going to pick one of those two teams at the end of the day?
He hasn't even met with Boston yet, so who knows if he's even going to Boston. I think at the end of the day, he signs with the Padres. I know everybody thinks it's the Dodgers. I felt like it was the Padres for a while. I think it's the Padres. The Padres have as strong a tie or close to as strong a tie with the Japanese market and player pool as the Dodgers. There's a little bit more of runway for Sasaki to be like a guy in San Diego without having to be, quote, the guy. Like he's not the one they have to rely on, but he can be a full-time pitcher in the rotation that doesn't have 9 MLB, credentialed starting pitchers.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where he winds up at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's what I would say too. And also, we can't let the Dodgers keep getting away with this.
We can't. They can't get away with it. Two more guys real quick. Joc Flaherty's market has been pretty quiet. I think it'll heat up now that Burnes has signed and Buehler has signed. There's some questions about Joc Flaherty hasn't had the most consistent career, but where do you think Joc Flaherty ends up?
Joc Flaherty to me seems like a Baltimore Oriole. They need to make a splash. They need to add a pitcher. They have the connection with him from 2 years ago at the trade deadline. I know he's been linked to them a little bit this offseason so far. They just have to spend some money. They have to spend money.
And he wasn't great after they got him the last time.
No. I remember their first start, he threw a 98-mile-an-hour fastball, and the internet was like ablaze. We're like, the Orioles have done it again. Can't stop them. And all of a sudden, you're like, oh, he's throwing 93 now. But that's similar to the Mets and Pete Alonso. That's a marriage that has to happen right now for this offseason to kind of feel complete for Flaherty and the Orioles themselves.
Yeah, I agree with you. The Orioles rotation is a mess. Not a mess. It is lacking, and it needs Joc Flaherty, and he needs a team like the Orioles, and it just makes too much sense to me. Mm-hmm. Last one, Anthony Santander, fresh off a 44 home run season. Teoscar Hernandez has now signed, so Santander feels like the best outfielder on the market. You mentioned the Carlos Baerga report about Pete Alonso. There was a Carlos Baerga report weeks ago linking Santander to the Astros. Does that feel like a landing spot for him, or do you think he goes somewhere else?
I mean, they can use an outfielder so badly. It's embarrassing, the outfield I think they're going to run out this season. I have no feel for Santander, though. I do not know where he's going to sign. I don't know who it seems like he's going to be linked to. I don't know. I think a team like the Royals could really use an outfielder. A team like the Guardians could really use an outfielder. I don't think either of them seem interested to spend the money it would take to acquire Anthony Santander. I have no texture, no feel for his market. If I had to guess, I would probably say a team that's willing to spend money and has the gaping hole like the Houston Astros, but he's in no man's land with his qualifying offer, because I think everyone knows that Anthony Santander for 4 or 5 years is a bad deal. But then you have to give up a draft pick to sign a guy for 2 seasons. That also probably feels like a bad deal. And the team that gave him the qualifying offer, there's no intention of re-signing him either in the Baltimore Orioles. So he's kind of in no man's land right now, and I do not know how it's going to wind up.
Yeah, he is sadly a poor defensive outfielder who could probably play first, most likely DH. It's not a great fit. My gut says Houston. I think it makes the most sense. I think he plays a fine enough corner outfield to be an outfielder for the Astros if they get down to the wire and they're like, we can't play a season with this outfield. I think they have the most motivation to sign him. I see it happening in Houston.
Yeah, I agree.
That's going to do it for this episode of the Rotoworld Baseball Show. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. We will hopefully have a podcast where we review the mock draft that James alluded to earlier on. We talk about some of our key takeaways of that. We'll do another podcast kind of breaking down whatever winter or whatever off-season moves come after this. And then we'll start getting into draft season and spring training season. And, everything will start to pick up now that, that other fantasy sport is done. Well, there's multiple, obviously. There's fantasy basketball content on Rotoworld. Make sure you check that out. There's still fantasy football content. All our player news over at Rotoworld will be up there for the postseason for the NFL. And then we'll obviously continue to churn out baseball season content. Our magazine will be online this year. That's going to be coming, and you got tons and tons and tons of player blurbs and articles and all of that from us. And that's going to be coming probably in February. So not that much longer before you get all of our stuff. Matthew Pouliot's putting out all his free agent stuff. He's working on all his projections. So we've got tons of content coming for you. You can follow us on Twitter. I am at Samski NYC. James is at James_Schiano, which is SCHIANO. Happy New Year to everybody. Happy New Year to you, James. Enjoy New Year's. Enjoy New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll check you in the new year, my friend.
Yeah, happy to do it.
We'll see you all later.